What is up, my beautiful people? Welcome to the Jonathan Benar podcast. Wow, it's been 2 weeks without an episode here, and it feels good to be back at the desk for just a short while before I jump right back on the road for another sprint. But let me know, how have you guys been? How's your week been? And also, how have the last 2 weeks been? Might have been some really hectic days, but also I've had some really wonderful times as well. So today's episode is just a little bit of a chit chat and an update of what our program for the podcast in the coming weeks kind of looks like. And since I'm in a phase of back-to-back trips to the bush, I thought I'd also just share a bit of wisdom that I've learned along the way, especially for those that are interested in, or those who are just starting out a journey in multimedia operations that are specific to tourism and conservation. So today we'll be specifically talking about photography and videography, just me sharing a few tips for those that are looking to venture into this field of wildlife, or call it wildlife photography and videography. It could also cut across into other fields as well. It crossed my mind as I was planning this week regarding how long I've been doing this and also how much I've learned from mistakes made over so many years of tourism and conservation multimedia operations. And in my way of being grateful to the universe and the creator, I'm glad to share a bit of my knowledge and a bit of what I've learned. So yes, in addition to the update to the podcast program, I will share 6 tips with you that focus on photography and videography work in the tourism and conservation space that I guess could benefit 1 or 2 guys tuned in today. And it might also be a refresher episode for some of you who are, if I could say, very experienced creators. So don't leave the episode. You might find some useful nuggets for yourself as well. You might also want to listen to an episode that we did a couple of months ago, specifically on the topic of wildlife photography. Just scroll down the episodes, go through the episode list, and you will see that particular episode. It was quite comprehensive, and I had on 3 experts. There was Peter Hogel, we had Brian O. Jonathan, and Becky Alexandria from Volcano Safaris, who joined me for a fantastic discussion on wildlife photography a couple of months back. So just be sure to scroll through the catalog, just through the previous episodes. You'll be able to see and find and enjoy that particular episode. As you can already tell, we have no guest on the podcast today, but we will resume those guest episodes in the coming weeks, so don't you worry. But before I get into the detail and well ahead of myself, let me first run the intro for those that are tuning in for the very first time. What's up, my beautiful people? Welcome to the Jonathan Benar podcast, a show that is wild, very wild. We are proudly Uganda's #1 conservation and tourism show, but we also benefit from a listenership from all across the African continent and the world at large. We try to put out a new episode every Sunday with discussions ranging around how to make the natural world a better place, creating awesome images, telling stories with words, wildlife films and photography, with occasional musings on sound and tech. If these topics fascinate you as much as they interest me, I promise you this podcast will have you in a spin. I do share a lot of my personal experiences, and from time to time, I'll have 1 or 2 guests on the podcast to have some very insightful discussions. So thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy your time here. Alright guys, welcome back to the Jonathan Benar podcast, where we do talk about Earth, we talk about images, we talk about words, for those that enjoy writing. We do talk about wildlife films and photography, tourism and travel, and from time to time we may slide in a discussion on tech or music. So I've been away from the desk, and while at it, I've enjoyed some really incredible moments. But I've also been planning with the team and also writing quite a bit, storyboarding, scripting, and just doing a lot of planning for a couple of upcoming projects. And while I was doing this, it kind of dawned on me how important and vital it is to, if I could say, get knowledge or garner knowledge about whatever thing that you set out to do. And as a proponent of African stories told by Africans, I'm glad to share a bit of wisdom that I've learned over the years that I hope will help another African creative tuned in today, but even any creative that is tuning in from any other part of the world. Yeah, so this is just experience from maybe lessons or tips learned from years and years of doing it, years of learning, and also years of unlearning, as some people say. And unfortunately, many a time the knowledge, or call it if I could say the technical know-how, might go unappreciated. People usually will judge you based on the work product. But I feel like the knowledge really forms a key segment of the creative process. Knowledge is pretty much like the bloodline of any successful or impactful project. And this is basically why I chose to share just 6 tips, or call them lessons, that I've learned over the years that I'm glad to share with you today. But perhaps before I go there, let me just provide a brief of what usually a photography or videography project kind of looks like. So usually you get a client who is reaching out, and fast forward down the road, you agree on budget and then you agree to create content for them. They basically hire you to help them tell a story or tell their story. This can be for various reasons. It could be to create content for advertising, maybe content driven towards marketing. It could be just general PR and communications content as well. This same process that I'm about to just share could also work for those personal, if I could call them passion projects, that you're not necessarily being paid for, but maybe the projects that you're very passionate about, that are maybe cause related. You're trying to drive a cause, be it personal mini documentaries, personal short films, and more. I feel like this same process would still be relevant for you as well. So it's not just for client commission projects. So what almost every experienced creator will do is to break down the creative process into 3 main phases. The first phase is the pre-production phase. So as you hear the English term, it's pretty much what you intend to do before the actual production or the actual bit of doing the work of creating the content takes place. So talk about things like scripting, maybe agreeing on a plan with a client. Perhaps it also includes bringing together a focused team of crew. It also maybe would entail getting your film and photography licenses, especially in destinations where you would need to get clearances to bring in, to even just shoot, or even bring in specialist equipment like drones and what. It might also include things like planning out your logistics for the field, planning out your packing list, and this packing list could cover both the essential equipment and also just personal items like packing right if it's going to be a hiking trip. Also just basically painting out. It's at this stage that you're really painting out a comprehensive, detailed image, and you want this to be as detailed as possible, an image of what you want the end product to look like and what the next 2 phases would follow in achieving the project's goal. And that leads me to the next phase. The next phase is the production phase. So we're coming from the pre-production phase. We've done all the planning and all the preparatory work, and now we are coming to the production phase. That's phase 2. In this phase is where the actual fun work happens, and this is what many a time people are looking forward to. When they see people like myself out in the field, many people think we get it easy. Of course, the field comes with its challenges, but we must also pretty much understand that the journey doesn't begin in the field. It begins in the pre-production phase. So there's quite a lot of work that's already been done in the pre-production phase, and now in the production phase is where you can say the actual fun work happens. Now this is where the actual bit of hitting the road happens, actual point of recording the content, shooting those photos, having those great experiences. It's also the time when you are pretty much enjoying the elements in the wild, meeting so many incredible people, interacting with them. And for us wildlife people, it also includes just interacting with the natural world, those animals, those birds, those plants, and of course the habitat in which they live. All right, then phase 3, which is the final phase, is what we call the post-production phase. So you have the pre-production phase, which comes before the production phase. Production phase is phase 2. Then phase 3 is what we call the post-production phase. And as you can hear, it comes after the production phase. And here we're looking at what you do with the content that you've come back to the city, if you're the kind that edits in the city, what you have on maybe your hard drives or on your laptop, or wherever you are storing the raw content that you've shot in the previous phase, which is the production phase. So this third phase, the post-production phase, is where everything now begins to fall in place, or maybe, if I could say, make sense. If you are a photographer and if you are working on photos, it's in this phase that you're pretty much making your selections. You're choosing which photos make sense for the project. You'll also maybe decide on what edits. Of course, if you need to do any edits to the photos, that's when you decide on what style of editing you want to go with, what actual enhancements you want to make, and actually doing those edits as required. And then if you are more from the video side, you are basically doing the same, but perhaps a bit more is happening if you are dealing with video. During the post-production phase, all the editing, all the sound design, talk about things like creating just an engaging sequence of clips that now tell the story well in light of the objectives that were set out in our first phase, which I said is the pre-production phase. I must maybe still mention that although these three phases might sound independent, they all pretty much fuse together and they complement each other. So they are all extremely important. Skipping one, rather ignoring one over the other, really impacts on the end product. You can read more about these three phases. Obviously, I do not intend to go too deep, but there are plenty of resources on the internet that explain each phase in a lot more detail. But maybe to wrap up the discussion on the three phases that we've talked about, and perhaps if I can use the analogy of someone who is penning down an article. For those who understand the sections of article writing, an article usually has an introduction, which is then followed by the body of text, which is basically where you're now, a lot of the work happens, where the detail is. And then finally you wind things up with a conclusion. I know this might not be the best example to use as a summary for the three phases that we just looked at, but we can call phase one the introduction. So it's basically the introduction to the project. And this is basically where you're looking at how best am I going to be able to hook the viewer or get them glued to the content that we want to share in the end. And then phase two would fall into, using the example of an article, it would fall into the body. This is where the meat of the content of the project is made. So this is where the content actually happens. And then finally, phase three would be that extra, you're just adding that extra flavor to now make things make sense. And with an article writer, that will be your conclusion. Sorry, someone is hooting. It does happen here. But just moving on, as you can see that these three, even in article writing, these three sections, that's the introduction, the body of text, and the conclusion, feed into each other and complement each other. Without one, the piece is pretty much incomplete. So with those phases out of the way, I just wanted to build a bit of context before I dive deep into my 6 tips for the day. I must state though that I will be sharing these tips. Do they say off the hook? Just coming off the head. So they will not be in any particular order, but they're all really vital tips that should help you bring your content to that next desired level. Yeah, so these are not going to be in any particular order, but I'm just going to try to organize the information in my head into like small munchable bits that I hope you'll get at least one thing to learn from. All right, let's dive right in. My first tip would be the importance of using movement to your advantage. Now, movement can mean so many things. It can mean something different for a photographer, and it can mean something totally different, or maybe slightly different for someone who is shooting video. In the photography world, in the wildlife photography world, it would mean things like, for instance, you requesting your driver guide to reposition the vehicle so that you can get a better angle of the subject. It might also mean you lowering yourself to the subject's level, as low as possible to the subject's level, as opposed to just, if I could say, casually shooting through the window. The importance of you going maybe towards eye level is that it would make the shot look and feel a bit more immersive for whoever is viewing it at the end of the day. Photos taken at the subject's level give this feeling of the viewer kind of feels like they are right there in the bush with the animal in person. Now, please don't confuse this with stepping out of your safari jeep while on safari. That's highly unrecommended, of course, unless you are permitted by one of those professional ranger guides. So by going down to subject's level, I mean just lowering your tripod. If you are shooting with a tripod, just bring it down to at least eye level of the animal. If you're photographing an elephant, for example, maybe an elephant is quite a huge animal to use as an example. Let me say an antelope. If you're photographing an antelope, then you'd want to bring your camera to a level where the camera is pretty much at the same height as the antelope's eye level. If it's an animal, instead of shooting down towards the animal, like looking down to it, which those are kind of photos most tourists will take, because for them it's just snapping the moment and let's get on. But if you are doing this a bit more seriously, then you want to try to create an image or a video where your end viewer feels like they are right there in the moment. Now, that's for the photography side. Now, for those who are in the video world, movement may mean all the things we've talked about in the photography side, but it might also mean a few more things, which include things like creating that in-camera movement that now brings the footage to life. Oftentimes in the wild, you don't really have control over the elements, as I did mention. Of course, you can still plan for what you want to do in the field, but many a time, moments just happen, and you don't really have control over what is going to happen and how it happens. It's quite different from the work that people back in the city would do in a studio. And this is where creating in-camera motion or in-camera movement can become very helpful in you getting your content to that next level and adding life to your pieces. So this can include things like moving your camera from side to side, which we professionally call panning, as opposed to just setting up your tripod and doing those static shots. And I have no beef against tripod shots, by the way, but I enjoy more, or maybe I just feel that a piece becomes more engaging when there is movement, because it gives the shot that extra oomph and also makes the viewer feel like they are actually there, and that's what we're looking for. Maybe to make sense of this movement thing, go back and watch all your favorite natural history productions. All those nice documentaries that are on BBC Earth, National Geographic, the Discovery Channel. You will see that the camera is always moving. Rarely do you see static tripod shots. Usually the camera is panning, it is flying along, it's floating around, moving. Rarely do you see that if I could call it like the type of shot which you have when you're shooting an interview where a camera is on a tripod, it's not moving, it's static. Rarely does that happen in these high quality productions. And this is something that I think Nat Geo, BBC Earth, Discovery Channel, this is something they borrow from the cinema world, because the camera in the movies that we watch, the cameras are always in motion, and this is intended to give you that realistic feel that you are right there in the actor's world, living, and at least you can relate that you are in their environment, in their situation at the time. And that's what oftentimes subconsciously keeps us right there at the edge of our seats, watching and enjoying those blockbusters that we always go to the cinema to see. Yeah, so yes, movement is key, but it needs practice to get, if I could call them, meaningful motion shots. If it's not done well, it can become a problem. It can be the poison that you did not need. Of course, there is a discussion on shaky footage, which is not fun to watch for anyone who enjoys video. Shaky footage is not the funnest to watch, unless, of course, that is the type of look or vibe that you are trying to achieve for a particular scene. All right, now let's move on to tip number 2, and this is the magic in using the foreground. Now, I don't know the best way to explain this without getting too techy or complicated, but basically an image can be broken down into many parts, but the main parts are usually 3, and this is where we get that phrase that you hear, 3D, or call it 3-dimensional images. So the 3 parts of the image are usually the foreground, then you have the middle ground, and then finally you do have the background. Now the foreground is whatever is closest to you, and in this case we mean whatever is closest to the camera lens. Then the middle ground is oftentimes where your subject is situated, so whatever you're shooting. So from the foreground you go to the middle ground, and then the third part of the image is the background, which all of you know, as I hope, as you hear it, it is what happens behind your subject. So basically what we want to achieve is a 3-dimensional look, which is basically making the best use of our foreground to then accentuate the middle ground and the background. You could use objects like maybe leaves if you have those nearby. Maybe if you're shooting in a forest, you could maybe lower your camera down and make use of the grass. And then maybe if you're shooting video, you could just pan down by the grass to use the grass as a layer before then people see the subject. So I don't know if you get that picture of the 3 dimensions. Another common way that I also use sometimes is if you are like in a forest, you can use a tree trunk. You could reveal a shot from a tree trunk, or you could still take a photo with the tree trunk as the foreground and your subject is in focus, and the tree trunk is perhaps blurred out or is not in focus, if I could use that as an example. If you are flying a drone and you may be perhaps in a drone pilot or in the drone world, you can use a cliff, or you could use a rock outcrop, and you could fly from a rock outcrop and then reveal an epic view, and that makes all the difference. Those are just some examples of how you could use foreground to create more than just a 1-dimensional image or a 2-dimensional image. Having those 3 dimensions really gives sense of place and sense of gives the viewer a feel of something extra, and this is why we enjoy watching those 3D movies in the cinema. Yeah, so feel free to read a bit more about these 3 dimensions and also get an understanding of how to use the foreground, what different use cases you could employ or rather deploy in your own creative process. Now, tip number 3 is making use of the rule of multiples. So what this basically means is you're taking multiple takes if you are maybe creating video. For those that are taking photos, you are taking multiple photos. You're basically taking more than one image of the subject. This also includes taking the photo from multiple angles. It also includes, if you're shooting video, shooting at multiple frame rates. It also includes shooting at multiple focal lengths. Now, focal lengths is basically, just in simple man's terms, it means getting the shot using more than just one lens. So maybe if you packed just 2 lenses, you have a wide lens and what we call a telephoto lens, which allows you to zoom in. You could take the photo of the same subject using a wide angle lens, a wide shot. Then you could slap on a telephoto lens to punch in a bit, or rather get closer to your subject and show a bit more of that detail. So now you're giving people both a wide lens to show the sense of space where the subject is located, its habitat and the environment, and then you're also giving us a bit of a close-up look of now what is the most important thing in the shot that you're taking. That is the animal, for example. You're doing a close-up of that particular animal. You could even take more than just 2. If your lens zooms further, you could maybe do a tight shot on the face. You could I like to do tight shots of lion tails as well. If it's a gorilla in the forest, I also like to do a tight shot of its hand. It's those little details that become very handy when you come to the editing phase. Yeah, so make sure to get a couple of shots done at different angles, different focal lengths. For those that are in video, different frame rates. Oh, and for those who have the liberty or rather the opportunity to use drones, then you can still get a shot, an aerial angle, and that gives an even fuller picture of your situation or whatever the story you're trying to tell. Don't forget that we as humans, we experience the world in multi-dimensions. We don't see the world in just one dimension or two dimensions. When you look around your environment, you're seeing not even just 3 dimensions, because we talked about 3 dimensions. You're seeing the world in so many dimensions. So the rule of multiples is to help you tell your story as comprehensive enough, create an image that is really as comprehensive enough as is practically possible at the time when you're in the field. If you can get that wide shot, get it. If you can get a telephoto shot, get it. If you can get an aerial shot, go ahead, get it. Change the angle, reposition, try something different, because then that really helps in the edit phase. You have a lot more to work with. That really helps the cause. It helps the story. All right, let's move on to the next tip, and that's tip number 4. Now, tip number 4 is about getting creative with natural light. As I did mention earlier, nature and wildlife creatives, we often do not really have control over the elements, but we can still plan with what is available to us. Working in the wildlife photo and film world, or basically shooting in the bush, is very different from studio settings. Studio settings, we pretty much have control over the subject. You can tell them to turn, you can tell them to sit, you can tell them to do whatever you want. And the most important thing is that you have constant lighting in a studio set. So you could set your same light situation and it will not change for the whole day, and you can shoot for the whole day. In the bush, it's not exactly, it doesn't happen that way, because oftentimes we're working with just a few hours in the morning light and then a few hours in the evening light. Many times the light in most of these destinations will become really, really harsh when the sun begins to get overhead and when it begins to blaze. Of course, this doesn't mean that you still can't shoot during those hours when the sun is really right overhead, right above. There are obviously hacks to that, like the use of ND filters, but that's a discussion for another day, and I don't intend to get too techie in this episode. So let me just explain what I mean by getting creative with the light. Anyone that takes photos or works in the photography or videography world, they will tell you that light is almost everything, but oftentimes you do not have access to the light that you would have wanted. So you need to get creative with it. Now, how do you get creative, especially with natural light? For instance, you may choose to shoot towards a sunrise or a sunset. Maybe if you're photographing antelopes, you could choose to have your antelope between yourself and the setting sun. Many a time people throw around the easy rule that rather the source of light is meant to be in front of the subject. But you can get creative. You can have the sunset behind your subject, have your subject in the middle, and when you snap that image, you'll see some beautiful light wrapping around your subject. If it's an antelope, it's wrapping around your waterback, for example, and it's giving it some nice radiant glow, which unfortunately I can't explain. I can't properly explain in words on a podcast. Yeah, but if you looked up some images of like a sunset, images of wildlife shot in what we call the golden hour, you get this beautiful light that is wrapping around the animal, and it makes it kind of pop out of the background and makes your subject look as majestic as it should rightfully be presented. Now, I've saved the best for the last. My final 2 tips are perhaps the most important for you tuned in. So if you are maybe slumbering or dozing, or if you missed the last 4 tips, please do not miss these last 2, because I feel like they are perhaps the most important for anyone who is in any wildlife or videography work that is skewed towards wildlife and nature. But I guess it would also mean the same for any documentary style work that you're doing for, I guess, any other field, be it agriculture, be it NGO work, and the rest. And maybe I should mention that I've gone through the tips really quickly, just skimming through the top. Yeah, so again, as I said earlier, go back and listen to that full episode that we did, particularly on the subject of wildlife photography, but it did include nuggets from the video side as well. And there you'll find things like the importance of understanding your setting, understanding animal behavior, and several other elements. But I'm just sharing these 6 tips, important tips that I felt that almost many a time go unnoticed or unappreciated enough, but they really add a lot of value, a lot of life, a lot of oomph to the work that we're doing. All right, let's move on to the second last tip, and that's tip number 5. Tip number 5 is that storytelling is the soul of the project. Storytelling is incredibly the soul of the project. Now, building an engaging narrative not only makes it easier for your team to shoot, it also helps whoever is editing that heavy footage and all that heavy photo content to know what to do with the footage. So what direction are you taking? And this also helps that when it gets to the viewer at the end of the day, it communicates to their emotions and makes them, as I like to tell people, feel things. Makes them feel, or rather it makes sense. They can relate with it. It makes them feel the hairs on their hands raise, if I could use that as a phrase. God save you if you are the one editing footage that was shot with no story at all. I've done that. I've been there, done that. It's not fun at all. It's very hard. It's very brain draining to try and create a winning narrative based on content that was really shot without a specific or clear roadmap or direction. Now, as I mentioned, my last 2 important tips come at the end. But I strongly feel like this particular tip on storytelling and the next one that I'll share should be way up high on the list. Like basically are meant to be at the first phase. That's basically the phase we talked about, the pre-production phase where you're planning everything out. It's very tough business for you to go out and just randomly record and then come back to the studio with hard drives full of hope and dope content that doesn't really have direction, or it doesn't clearly have a storyline to it. I think that type of shooting would be okay for someone who is a novice or someone who is just creating short form content for maybe a simple social media post. But for folks who are working on a bit more serious and detailed project, or if you're working on some serious stuff, you want to think through what you want to communicate. Is it a cause? Is it what message are you putting out there, and how best are you doing that at the end of the day? I believe that the story is why you might end up watching and enjoying a clip that is of 720p quality, that's 720p quality. If that clip has an engaging story, you might enjoy watching that, and you might not worry about how many pixels or how clear the picture is, as opposed to a 4K quality image or a 4K quality video, that doesn't really have direction, or it doesn't really tell anything. It's not. You don't feel like the creative intended to do anything interesting with it. It doesn't seem to have a meaningful narrative to it. I've actually watched some YouTube videos where a creative puts out a short film, completely shot at different, if I could call them, video qualities. There's one shot at 720p, 1080p, 4K quality. And of course, although we would enjoy as clear of an image as possible, many a time, if it doesn't have an engaging storyline, we're going to get bored really quickly, and off we go to find some other content that we can quickly and more interestingly resonate with. All right, let's see our final tip for the day, and that's tip number 6. All right, so tip number 5 feeds into tip number 6, which I believe 6 for me is the most important tip, and that's effective planning. I cannot overstate how important planning is, especially for someone who is learned it the hard way. Planning is so important for any photography or videography project that you're working on. Be it if you're shooting solo or if you are working with a crew, it's very, very, I can't say very enough, it's very important. Effective planning is, I feel, the single most important tip on this list. So if you can live with just one thing, take planning with you. It will save you a lot of stress in the field. And for those who do their own production and post-production, it will also help you prepare for things that may not go according to plan. There's having this vague idea in your head and you think things are just going to work out as you expect. And many a time it's not the case. Things might be things like managing expectations of the team. Your crew might reach the field and someone gets sick. Maybe your A member, your A camera operator gets sick. You've got to plan for all those situations. You've got to plan for rain. You've got to plan for when the sun will just refuse to give you that magical sunrise or sunset that you thought was a constant, that it had to happen. I used to joke with someone when I was just starting out, when I did my first trip to Queen Elizabeth National Park. I saw so many elephants on that Kazinga boat cruise. When I went back the second time, I saw many elephants. On my fourth visit, I didn't see any elephants, and I was so surprised because I kind of had this at the back of my head that seeing elephants along the Kazinga channel was a constant, that they had to be there, come rain, come sun. So it does happen when you least think it would. Nature surprises you. It doesn't show up, and when you least expect it, sometimes it will just show up and you'll have the most magical experience. So you've just got to plan and prepare for all those moments and just mentally be prepared for what could or what could not happen. I often joke with my crew that nature is not your mother. Nature is not your relative. It will do what it wants to do whenever it wants to do. Of course, we always and quite frankly say that nature gives birth to all of us. It protects all of us. But we cannot expect that it will always do what we want it to do, if I could say. It's not a studio. You're not at a zoo, and even at the zoo, if you're with those animals, they might sleep, they might refuse to get up. So yeah, nature really is not like Hollywood, where the director is telling the crew, now we cut, now let's go, now let's get the shot. No, nature will do what it wants to do, and you'll have to adjust accordingly, and you've got to plan for those situations. Anyways, I like to say that the heavy lifting should happen in the planning phase. You can talk about things like maybe putting together your budgets, costing everything out, making sure you don't forget anything. Talk about a clear script of what you want to shoot, the storyboarding this to at least give it a visual picture. You can have a script as text, which for some people it's okay to work with. I feel like I enjoy going all the way and also adding a bit of an image to the text so that I, at least visually, and also my crew has a picture of what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day visually. And when I storyboard, I'm also including comments for what the sound should feel like, what the narration should feel like, so that we're all going to the field and we pretty much on the same page, we pretty much emotionally at the same wavelength. During the planning phase, you're also talking about things like making sure you have your licenses and clearances done, as I mentioned earlier when we were discussing the phases, pre-production phase. And in the planning phase, you're also talking about what decisions are you making regarding the type of equipment that you need to take. Many a time you may forget to pack something, or you may end up packing so many things that you don't necessarily need for a particular trip because you didn't plan. Rarely do you have two different trips that would have exactly the same type of equipment. You want to look at every project in itself and plan accordingly for it. In the planning phase, you're also planning about what you're going to do on which day, where are you traveling, where you're going to do it, how are you getting there. You're talking about shooting plans, you're talking about things like weather forecasts. Will it rain? And of course, even if the weather forecast says it will rain, it might not necessarily rain. So you've just got to have a plan. And also still in the planning phase, this is when you make your crew decisions. Who are you bringing on board? Who are the team members that you're deciding would come on board to bring your idea and the client's objectives to life? The planning phase can also include just planning for your own safety, and also the safety of your crew, which I feel like is perhaps a lot more important than just pressing the record button or clicking the shutter. If you don't have people that are, if your people are not safe and healthy and alive, no one will be there to capture those incredible moments. Effective planning is going to make the creative process a whole lot more enjoyable and a lot less stressful. At least that's something I've learned over the years. And you don't have to make the same mistakes some of us made when we were just starting out. Yeah, so you want to plan so that when you get to the field, you're now focusing on being the creative genius that you're paid to be, and you're not now having to deal with so much in the field and miss moments, arrive at the wrong time, maybe be caught in the rain, spoil equipment. You've got to plan for all those situations. It's in the planning phase that you're doing all the dirty work. You're doing as much dirty work as you can. You're thinking through the whole project as much and as in detail, and you're breaking it down in small, call them the littlest of elements. You're breaking down to the smallest of elements, so that you have all the scenarios thought out and you have a close to clear picture of what the end product will look like. What is it going to be? Where are you going to do it? How is it going to look? Why are you doing it? Is there a cause that you really need to advance? And of course, you're talking about schedules. When is it going to happen? So that is the 5 W's that if you are a marketer or if you are in the advertising world, you probably know of. The what, the where, the how, the why, and the when. You're doing all this in the planning phase. Yeah, so that's it. Practice these important tips and also do a bit more reading around them. They can be a lifesaver, I tell you. I kid you not. Can be a lifesaver so many times. Oh, before I close, I did mention that I'd share a bit of an update on what the next couple of weeks for the show will be. So there's going to be a period of, if I could call it, intermittency over the next few weeks or months. I might be missing in action as I focus my mind on a couple of projects that I've been commissioned to work on. I might record a few impromptu episodes on the road, but I'm making no promise. So don't hold me hostage in case I do not live up to that claim. I might record a few impromptu episodes. If I do, they will end up on the podcast. If not, then I'll definitely be back. I know we've been trying to put out a new episode every Sunday. Fortunately, we've had some incredible guests come on to share some invaluable insights, but that might not be possible for a while. Don't worry, we will be back with some even more fascinating conversations. And we are also working on, I've just been discussing with a couple of colleagues regarding how to make this a video podcast, because the rate at which it's been growing, it makes it very attractive for us to bring some of these conversations and add a visual side to it and do it the right way. Of course, we want to do that when we are ready and we are fully confident that we will do it the right way with high quality and that we can sustain it. Maybe I should also mention again that those guest episodes that you all enjoy will also be returning to the podcast. So don't you worry, the podcast is not closing. We're just taking a bit of a break. But as always, I'd like to also say a very big thanks to all of you for supporting the show. Thank you for streaming. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for recommending the show to your friends. Get some very nice messages in the DM with people who are discovering the show and shocked at how a podcast show like this does exist in Uganda. Well, things do happen, and thank you all for the support. And maybe just finally, for all you awesome people who've recommended me for gigs, including some of you who have invited me for some upcoming speaking assignments, paid assignments, which is good. You guys are really the MVPs, so I thank you so much. Alright guys, that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this and also at least learned one thing or two. And I hope that you can use some of those tips in your own creative process. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button, share this link in your circles, and let's get this conversation beyond this platform. And for those that just can't get enough and would like to hear or listen to more of such conversations, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and also check out some of those earlier episodes in case you missed those. People listening on Apple Podcasts might actually be able to leave a star rating, so please don't forget to rate the show if you haven't already. that really helps get us up the charts. It's helped us keep way high up the charts as well. As we already said, the podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, for those tuning in the US. It's also available on TuneIn, Pandora, Castbox, Deezer, and several other platforms. As always, if you would like to make a contribution to the conversation, or if you'd like to send in a question or a comment, you can email me directly at contact@jonathanbenaya.com, or you can also use ahabenathan@pm.me. Both emails will be linked in the podcast notes below. Call it the podcast description, so you can just go down there and copy the email. And maybe just finally, I'd like to once again say a very big thanks to our Patreons. It's through your pledges that we're able to keep this show alive and running. Alright, I guess I'll see you in a bit. Wish me luck on these projects that are keeping me busy. And for all of you hitting the road soon like myself, I'd like to wish you happy travels, of course, safe travels, and as we always say here, keep those trips responsible, leave the destinations clean, don't litter, be sustainable in how you experience the destinations that you're setting out to visit. I almost forgot. Uganda's Kidepo Valley National Park was nominated in the World Travel Awards. That's in the category of the best national park on the continent. Please go vote. I've left a link in the podcast description to where you can vote if you've not already. And also, I'll leave a link to a Daily Monitor article that was written by a friend of mine, Edgar Bate, to which I did make a contribution as well. So yeah, that link as well to the article will be down there. Please click on the link to the vote. Vote. I can't say that enough. You all know that this park is my favorite Ugandan national park. I should be in Kidepo in a few weeks' time, I believe. Might actually be a few days. And I look forward to experiencing that raw wilderness again. It's not the first time that the park is nominated. So I think let's really vote, and make sure that we bring this award home this time. Am I too early to wish you all a happy Ramadan and happy Easter? Well, happy Ramadan for all of you who will be fasting, and happy Easter for those that do celebrate. Wow, I think I need to close this episode because it needs to end at some point. Yeah, but thank you all for tuning in. I will see you all in a bit. I'll see you in the next one.